I'm Justin Silverman of the New England First Amendment Coalition. Thank you all for joining this month's 30-minute skills class on how to navigate the court system. As a reminder, you can access all of our classes at nefac.org/30-minute skills. All right, we have a lot to cover and not a lot of time, so here's your instructor, Syracuse University professor and director of the Tully Center for Free Speech, Roy Gutterman. Roy, all yours.
Part of what I'm here to do today is to demystify the court system for you. One of the things that I like to tell students and just about any journalist I talk to is that every reporter is a court reporter, whether it's your actual beat as a court reporter or you have another beat, because so many beats intersect with the judicial system. Right? Entertainment reporters. I mean, just case in point, this debacle on the Alec Baldwin movie. We've got reporters from Entertainment Tonight talking about legal issues like proximate cause and liability. So you are all a step away from being a court reporter. Political reporters, that's obvious because so much of our legislation, so many of our political scandals end up in court that's almost a no-brainer. But to think a little more horizontally, sports reporters. Sports reporters are always a step away from courts and legal issues. So I want to demystify the edifice of the courthouse for us. This is a big story we had a few years ago that involved grand jury issues here in Syracuse. So other beats that intersect with the courts, you can just use your imagination: government, environment, education, business. If you're a business reporter, I would totally encourage you to learn about SEC regulation and enforcement. So regardless of what you're covering, you will intersect with the courts eventually. I'm also here to tell you, you don't need to have a law degree to cover the courts, even semi-competently. We've got, my little gallery here, some famous reporters that you might be familiar with: Linda Greenhouse, Tony Morrow, Lyle Denniston, Mark Obie, a former colleague here who's been an established legal affairs reporter. These are all some of the top reporters who cover legal issues who do not have a law degree. They just know how to read. And like I tell students, you can understand the law if you know how to read. That's a basic low-level principle here. So I also like to point to IRE, because IRE is kind of our go-to for investigative reporting. And I pulled this little nugget from one of my old IRE books talking about mountains of public records and paperwork. So, you know, if you are covering legal issues, you will deal with a mountain of paperwork, and it's all there for you. So, you know, to work with it, it will set you head and shoulders above other reporters. Right. And we go to the courthouse under the premise that everything is open to the public, right? And again, it's the public and the press. There's an important theory here that the press has no greater right than the public on many of these legal issues, but you know, the courts operate under a presumption of openness, and that openness is traditional to the actual courtroom, but it also transfers into the records and the documents. So you know, we go to Chief Justice Berger, who incidentally was not a real fan of the press, but he wrote a number of opinions, including this one that was about a retrial of a murder case, multiple retrials of a murder case, and really talks about the press's role. To localize it a little bit, I know many of you are from Massachusetts. Massachusetts has some pretty strong protections here that cases and materials are going to be presumed to be open. And just you look at this laundry list from this one court opinion of transcripts and evidence and memoranda and court orders. This is the gold mine for you as a reporter. and it's all there for you. You just have to find it. You just have to take that step to go for it. Right. So again, when we talk about the court system, we've got the presumption of openness, and it transfers into dockets, right? The lists of cases and the file numbers open to the public. Courtrooms for proceedings are presumed to be open to the public. That means they're open to the press. And the records, all the records are assumed to be open to the public. And again, it's the gold mine for you. So part of what we have to figure out, if we are doing court reporting or we are doing some sort of investigative reporting that dovetails with the courts, we sort of have to look for things like where are the cases? Where are the materials? Is it a state issue? Is it a federal issue? Is it a civil issue? Is it a criminal issue? Is it a family issue or probate? So some basic understanding of where the cases are is kind of important. You know, just case in point to share, when I was an intern at a newspaper, I was assigned to cover some sort of bankruptcy issue that was associated with I think it was a cult in the city that I was covering. And I called the wrong courthouse. I called the county courthouse for a bankruptcy issue that was obviously federal. So again, a mistake that I made as a novice. Hopefully would not be something that you'd make in your professional lives. But again, it's language. It's an understanding of a system that might seem intimidating at first, but the more you do it, the easier it gets and the less imposing it gets. So I found this nice little flow chart of Massachusetts system, found this flow chart of New Hampshire, but part of the beauty of the digital age is that every state and every state court system has a ton of information out there, just basic information. You might not be able to get all the documents that you want on a case just by sitting at your computer, but you'll certainly figure out where you can go to get those and how you can get it. So I do have some websites, and again, if you're doing reporting on these issues, you probably already have these sites bookmarked, right? But again, being tethered to your computer is one thing. Actually going and getting out there and getting materials might require a trip to the courthouse, at least with many state issues. And Massachusetts, the Massachusetts court system has a nice statement on the openness and the organizational structure and all that. Okay. So again, how do court reporters find information? Dockets, calendars, notices. Calendars, most judges, chambers will have a list of the daily occurrences outside their chambers. Some of this is digital, so it could require some daily visits. Right, and here's the docket. This is from the New York e-court system, but I understand, again, this is what a docket would look like. But there are other docket databases. Pacer, if you're covering federal courts, is an extremely useful service. It's a subscription service, so there are fees. You might not have it in your budget to access this, but you might. Also, some law schools have public databases you can access, and some libraries have access as well. But there are a number of subscription services that do give you live docket checks and do have a variety of documents available through them. Personally, I like Bloomberg. I get access to Bloomberg through my campus library, and that's one of my go-to sources. Also LexisNexis or Westlaw, but those sources tend to be better for secondary resources, things like law review articles, news articles, as well as judicial opinions, which are valuable from a legal understanding, but might not have that much newsworthiness or value from a reporting standpoint. From a reporting standpoint, we're really looking for documents and cases and materials from there. I did find that Boston College, I'm sure some of you have seen this as well. Boston College has a pretty useful public docket access portal. So you might want to poke around there in your spare time and just look. Reporters are inquisitive, if not nosy. My wife likes to say that I'm a busybody, but one of my favorite things to do is to poke around on dockets. So you can spend some time on your own looking for things, and maybe you'll uncover something, or maybe you'll get a lead and take it to the next step. So reporters always rely on people, right? The documents are important, but in courtrooms and legal affairs, the people are going to be part of your story. The people are going to be telling your story. The people are going to be helping you source your story. So again, if you're starting out, you're going to want to cultivate sources. Your lawyers are going to be sources. Prosecutors, defense lawyers, public defenders, they're going to be sources. They might not be able to talk to you on the record, maybe an off the record or background primer would be a good session to have on this as well, right? But you might be doing some informational interview type stuff, or just some backgrounding, and you'll definitely want to talk to the lawyers. And again, because we're dealing with public records, with court cases and court files, you can track them down. You can find them. But again, not everybody's going to want to talk to you. In government circles, not everybody might be authorized to talk to you on the record. So it's cultivation. It's traditional, old-fashioned shoe leather reporting. Okay. We also have the litigants, right? These are the people who are fighting in court. So plaintiffs always have a story to tell, especially in some high-profile cases. They might be available. They might be sources. Pro se plaintiffs representing themselves, love to talk to reporters, and they don't understand the confines of the legal system in some ways. So they might be a real gold mine. Defendants as well, although you do have to be concerned about defendants in criminal matters. They might not want to talk to you because of self-incrimination issues, but good reporters get people to talk. Even bad reporters get people to talk. So you always have to make that call and try to get that interview. So you can't let the confines of the process stymie you or intimidate you from making those phone calls. Because what's the worst somebody can say to you? No, I don't want to talk to you. Right? What's the best they might say to you? They might give you a whole interview or give you leads. So you can never assume that somebody's not going to want to talk to you, even when they're tied up in litigation. Witnesses and experts, that might be touchy if you're in the middle of a trial. You probably don't want to approach witnesses until they're totally done with their testimony. I'd say you don't want to do that. Same with experts, but once a case is done, or once they're done with their testimony, they might be eager and available to talk to you. Again, what's the worst somebody can say? No. Judges are kind of tricky. And again, it would depend on the type of case. It would depend on the jurisdiction. It would depend on the time of year. So most judges are not going to want to talk to you as a reporter. But I'm loath to create an absolute firm rule on that too, because there might be situations where a judge will grant you an interview. Lower court judges who are elected, they tend to want to talk a lot during campaign season. So again, understanding the system, understanding what's going on might help you assess whether somebody wants to talk to you or not, whether somebody can talk to you or not. Court administrators, I don't know how newsworthy or quote-worthy they might be, but if you're trying to get a handle on the system or get access to certain things, they might be there to assist as well. They might be helpful in even things like cameras in a courtroom, which I might talk about in a little bit as well. And then clerks. There are different types of clerks in the judicial system. There's what they call an elbow clerk to a judge, and that's kind of like a legal assistant. It's usually a first or second year grad who works almost like an apprentice for the judge for a year and then goes and becomes a lawyer. But they're not going to be your sources. I can tell you that. I was a judicial law clerk in New Jersey. I've met many law clerks, and they're not sources, right? They are going to be really loyal to the judge that they work for, so they're not really going to be your sources. But there are other types of clerks in the judicial system, and those are the administrative clerks who run the courts, the clerk of the court. These are the people who are really going to help you track down documents, right? When you go to the courthouse and you get a docket number, you write it down and you give it you go and ask somebody to get you the files. Those are the clerks who are going to help you. Those are the clerks who might be able to point you in other directions or give you a little more leverage to find things. So again, the personalities, these are different kinds of clerks. It's just an inside joke, right? These are people who are there to help you. They're going to be busy. They might be curt with you. They might be a little standoffish, but they are there to help you. So, cultivate them, be nice to them, be appreciative. Again, just like you would manage any other type of court beat or beat that you're dealing with. All right. Just briefly, it sort of helps to have a little bit of an understanding of the anatomy of a case. Right? Our civil cases begin with a complaint filed by the plaintiff. Right? States a cause of action, recites the facts, and states a claim, what they want. Now, from a news gathering standpoint, from a reporting standpoint, the recitation of facts is probably going to be your gold mine, right? That's where the plaintiff state tells you what happened, and it's all in black and white. It's very fact oriented, very detail oriented, but these are things that will be your gold mine for your narrative in your story, right? But we know in an adversarial system, there are two sides to the story. You've got the plaintiff, you've got the defendant, and the defendant answers the complaint. That'll be tantamount to a plea, right? And that'll be their side of the story. And again, depending on the type of case, depending on the rules of the judicial system, there are filing dates and deadlines and stuff like that, it's all stuff you can look up in the court rules, and that'll help you get an idea for planning a story, planning how you're going to be proceeding with your news gathering and all that, right? Criminal cases, again, that's a gold mine too for us. There's so much drama with a criminal case that, again, most cases will begin with an indictment or a grand jury indictment or an arraignment. So these are all things you're going to want to understand and report. And that's all part of your story. Now, it could be daily stories, could be broader, long range or enterprise or investigative pieces. It all depends. Right? But our cases aren't resolved in like I say with law, the TV show Law and Order in 28 minutes. Cases drag on for a long time, particularly complicated civil cases. And you might have hearings, you might have, definitely have discovery. And again, this is a gold mine for reporting. This is where documents are exchanged and filed. And you can get, as a reporter, you can gain access to this. So, you've got to pay attention to filings, pay attention to what's coming into the court system. And again, I've got my little inset here of TV, whatever she is, TV cook, Paula Dean. Remember, she was enveloped in some controversy involving some racial statements that she made. Well, again, I like to tell reporters, she didn't send out a press release saying that she was using epithets and saying awful things. That came out of a deposition. And that deposition was filed in a court case that she was involved in. So again, being the reporter who knows how to find these documents, being the reporter who can monitor things and see these things pop up and identify something newsworthy, that'll get your stories out there. Again, going back to one of my earlier slides with former New York Governor Spitzer, remember he got arrested, he ended up stepping down from office because he was involved in a prostitution scandal. And again, that didn't come out of a press release. That came out of some documents in discovery that a reporter was able to find, maybe was tipped off to, but again, it was a reporter getting the information from court files and court records. So there's gold out there waiting for you. Just have to look for it or be lucky enough to find it when it pops up. Right? And then we've got trials. And again, this is a great part of American history where our trials are going to be open to the public, and that's everything from motion hearings that are pretrial to jury selection to the opening statements, testimony, closing statements, verdicts, and in criminal cases, sentencing, right? So again, there's drama, there's tension, there's stories, and you know, I hope many of you get the opportunity to cover some of these one day, because not only is it great, you know, public journalism, but the public relies on you to be able to tell these stories and report on what's going on. Right? The public doesn't have time to sit in a courtroom for 8 hours a day and see what's going on, but that's your job. That's our job. Right? We do encounter courtroom closures, and they can be closed for some real narrow situations. And if you are in one of those situations, you might have to stand up and ask for permission to intervene. You might have to call counsel, but again, the presumption of openness is there for us, and closing the courtrooms for certain things is not entirely unusual, but they have to be for legitimate reasons to exclude the public and the press. Right? A couple more reasons why reporters should use the courts. Obviously, you're serving a fourth estate function, keeping a check on the government, keeping a check on the justice system, keeping a check on this branch of government. But there are other reasons too, more journalistic reasons. Right? Again, the public has an interest here. But from purely selfish journalistic reasons, covering courts, covering legal affairs, covering legal proceedings can provide you with content and data. Some investigative reporters refer to this as collecting evidence for your story. Gives you reference points, gives you leverage for questions, right? We all write down our questions or plan out an interview, and then we sometimes run into a dead end. Well, if you've got court documents, that gives you a little more to talk about, right? Plus, from a purely self-serving standpoint, if you're drawing statements from court files, they're going to be privileged, right? Under the fair and accurate report privilege. And that means you have immunity if you get sued. Even if you don't get it 100% right, most states grant some leeway and some immunity under this privilege. So, every state has this. It's an important privilege, and it speaks to the important function that we serve in covering legal affairs. Just briefly, we're getting close to time on this. Cameras are a touchy thing. There's a pretty firm rule that federal courts will not allow cameras in the courtroom. Not a lot of wiggle room there. There have been a few pilot projects in a few federal districts, but you're going to be out of luck in that scenario. Not only that, but you're probably not even going to be allowed to bring your phone into a federal courtroom either. So there's not much win there. At the state level, it's a state by state issue. So we see Massachusetts allows some cameras in courtrooms, but it could be limited as well. I know I'm brushing over a lot on this, but Maine will allow only upon authorization. Maine has, and even in civil, there's a little more wiggle room. New Hampshire will permit some, but again, it's going to be case by case, state, county by county in some ways. So if you are intent or interested in bringing cameras into into a courtroom, you'll probably want to check in advance and perhaps arrange that in advance. All right. For a state-by-state breakdown on this, I always refer people to the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. It's a great advocacy organization for us, rcfp.org. They've got state-by-state breakdowns on this, and they can provide help as well, just like Justin can provide help. And just to close this out, I was preparing and found an old story that I wrote when I was an intern, and that's me in the background there. But the point on this was, a week after I was covering some legal issues associated with the cleanup of the harbor, and I had interviewed this judge at the site, and I was at the federal courthouse about a week later, doing a docket check because the federal courts reporter was out of town, and he called me into his office and he pointed to a file cabinet and he said, "Gutterman, these files are public records, and there are documents here that the public has a right to see and the press has a right to see. And for the last 30 years, I've been kept up at night knowing that I'm probably missed a real opportunity to find some stuff that nobody else has probably found. So it's all there for you." And then just to close it out, the public's relying on us to tell the stories, to dig into these documents and find out what's going on. So, the first step is probably the hardest and the most intimidating, but if you can read, you can figure out what's at stake. And if you can do a good interview, you can get people to explain all these fancy legal terms, which really aren't all that fancy anyway. So, just get out there, try, give it a shot and see what you find. And, you've got resources as well, plenty of resources and plenty of people you can always follow up with. So here's my contact information. I'm a Google search away, I'm an email away, so you can always reach out, and I'm happy to talk you off a ledge or point you in the right direction.
All right, thank you, Roy. We only have another minute or two, but I do have a couple quick questions I'd like to get to. The first is, what kind of strategies or guidance would you give those that are looking for some quick and hopefully inexpensive ways to track lawsuits and filings rather than going to individual courthouses or paying a hefty subscription fee? What can we do to stay on top of what's happening within the courts?
Find the public resources. Most states will have some form of a public docket that you might be able to access. And I found the Massachusetts court docket at BC. Some states through the court administration will have online public dockets as well. It's sometimes a patchwork depending on counties, but just start to do the legwork and lay it out and see what you can find. Do some fishing.
All right, another question, making note of the fact that most cases never go to trial. Many civil cases are settled, or maybe there's some plea bargaining in criminal cases. What kind of access, if any, do members of the public have to those negotiations and the ultimate agreements that are made that prevent a trial from occurring?
You won't have access to negotiations. You will have access to motions and motion arguments and motion hearings and documents filed with motion papers. So you might have to do some extrapolation that way. but there's a public interest in not having negotiations open to the public. That being said, there are human sources that might, that might provide information. Lawyers like to say they don't negotiate through the press, but people negotiate through the press. So again, cultivating the sources and at least being ready and being on notice when a result might be released.
And then lastly here, before we wrap up, for those that are new to covering courts, maybe they've never even been into a courthouse before. They walk in the doors for the first time. What would you suggest they do? What are those very first steps that they should take to become more acquainted with the court system and those working within the courthouse?
Ask questions to the people who can talk to you. We all start out somewhere. There's always it's always new for everybody at one point. And just ask questions. The clerks might not want to, you might not be able to quote them, right? They might get a little hesitant or reticent if you're showing up with a notebook, but you can ask for an explanation and they're there to help you. And it might make their lives easier if if they can tell you in a couple of quick sentences here and there what the game is all about and what's there. So there's no such thing as a stupid question, especially if you're starting out, especially if you're trying to figure out what's going on. The law is a different kind of language, it's a different procedure, but you can read, you can figure it out, and you can ask the questions. And you can always, if you're embarrassed, you can always temper your question. You've got to explain it to your editor, or my editor has a question, or I just want to make sure I'm really getting this so I can explain it to my readers or my viewers. So, no matter what you're covering, you're always going to be translating, whether you're a science reporter or a business reporter or a government reporter or a cops reporter, you're always translating technical language and data for a lay audience or regular people. So ask the questions and get the explanation that way.
Great. Ask a lot of questions, make friends with the clerks. Thank you so much, Roy. Appreciate all of this. Very helpful. Also want to thank all of you who joined us today. And a reminder, if you found what we discussed here today valuable in any way, please consider making a donation at nefac.org. Help us keep these lessons free and open to the public. I want to thank you all again, and we'll see you next month for our next 30-minute skills.